a scale of 1 to 5, how pleasurable is that?
5.
Jackpot.
It's one thing to be emotionally vulnerable on camera, but to be sexually vulnerable, we've never really seen this before.
Orgasm doesn't have to be slot A goes into slot B. It can be anywhere on their body.
Am I nervous? Yes, but I'm ready.
We offer a space to be sexual and not have that be a shameful thing.
We were close to getting a divorce.
I had blinders on.
What they came for is very common. We're gonna have to work on the sexy factor a bit.
His parents are wondering why he doesn't have babies, and am I gonna have an orgasm before I have a baby?
Oh.
Shit.
So there's 5 different erotic blueprints. Here's an energetic touch. Here's a sensual touch. Here's a kinky touch. Oftentimes, couples' blueprints, they're opposites.
Can we acknowledge that sex is how we play as adults?
Okay, let's bring out a couple little pleasure items. These are my Wolverine claws.
I did not expect that we could make these leaps.
I just want to look at myself in the mirror and say with absolute confidence that I am beautiful.
This is happiness.
We're having sex, it's a show about sex, we're gonna talk about sex.
I just realized I've been embracing
For a long time.
You're not broken.
You compare sex to brushing his teeth. You're saying, I want to be the king.
What just happened to me?
If one person changes their erotic lives, it's worth it.
No matter what it looked like on camera, if you haven't felt that before.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm very, very, very excited to be here today at the 92nd Street Y virtually to talk all things sex, love, and goop. We have 3 very special guests who are all featured in Netflix's new Sex, Love, and Goop series, which I had the pleasure of watching on my plane yesterday, and I learned a lot, and I've already applied a couple things. So we have Michaela Boehm here, who is Goop's go-to expert in intimacy, relationships, and sexuality. We also have Jaiya, who is a sexological body worker and founder of the Erotic Blueprint Types. And we have Amina Peterson here, who is a tantra and sacred intimacy coach. So all 3 of these teachers and body and sex workers, probably not sex workers is the appropriate term, but you know, I'm gonna mess up things as we go along, so just bear with me, they'll correct me, are all featured in helping couples kind of realize their sexuality, become more self-actualized, more sexualized, better communicators. And it was a very beautiful thing to see so many people open themselves up, not only personally, but in front of a camera, which is very courageous and brave. So I'd like to introduce each person that we have here today, and they can tell you, Michaela, why don't we start with you, and you can just give us an overview of what your specialties are, how you got involved in the work that you do.
Yeah, hello, and thank you. This is such a pleasure. I'm so excited that we also get to be together on here and kind of, you know, exchange a bit. So my name is Michaela Boehm, and I've been doing this kind of work. I have a whole body of work that I've created within the last 24 years. And my work combines my really extensive counseling experience. I've done over 30,000 one-on-one client hours. So I've worked with an enormous amount of people on sex and relationship one-on-one, but I've also developed an entire body of work on how to bring the body to the sexual occasion and the relational occasion. And I'm the founder of the nonlinear movement method, which is somatic release modality. And I, you know, essentially live, breathe, and enjoy working so much in that field because it's an underserved domain. People don't learn about relationships, and they don't learn about how to bring the body to sex. And I'm very, I have a trauma therapy background, so I'm very intent on making sure people understand that sometimes what looks like a sexual block is simply an unexplored, let's say, contraction or traumatic event that can be worked with in the body. So it's been super exciting to see, how that actually is being portrayed on the show and how everybody attends to that.
Yeah. And there's a lot of overlap between the three of you too, from what I saw on the show, because it all does involve your body and being in touch with your body and the way that your emotions live in your body. Jaiya, can you tell us about yourself a little bit?
Yeah, great. And I love that we're talking so much about embodiment, because sex is something that happens in the body. Michaela says it in the show. It's like this thing that we get so heady about. And that's been a big piece of my work, as how do we bring it to the body? And somatic or sexological body work, somatic sexology, is about the body and not just the mind. Of course, the mind has a piece in it, that's part of it, but it's really this integrated, more holistic aspect of sexuality. So like Michaela, I've had decades of work in this, many hours of working with clients. But I think the thing I'm most passionate about is seeing the transformation that happens and people realizing who they are. That's the most rewarding piece, is that transformation, the self-realization of who and what we are. My front door says in big neon sign, sex, 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 and orgasms and all those great things. But behind that is something so much deeper than when people go on this sexual journey, they have these realizations of something so much more. And so many people say, I didn't know that coming into this journey of sex would bring me to something so much deeper than I ever imagined. This was so much more than about sex than I thought, because we're all a product of sex. We all came from sex. And because we've demonized it so much in our culture, there's something fundamental about feeling shame and taboo. And Michaela talked about trauma. I mean, it's so much, it's so deep. It's how we relate with other people. So I created something called the Erotic Blueprints, which you mentioned, the Erotic Blueprint Types. And this was a way of how I saw people's different personalities, or I love personality typing tests like disc profile or the Enneagram, some of these things that I got really into, the love languages. And that inspired me to figure out, well, who are we as erotic beings? What does that look like? And how do we both celebrate our individuality and our unity within our sexuality?
Yeah, it is so enlightening to know. I think a lot of us are learning about intergenerational trauma for the very first times, or actually taking it seriously as a society for the very first time, and understanding that it's not only the trauma that we've experienced, but there's trauma that's passed down through our bodies from so many generations. Yep. And so now we have an opportunity to have more open conversations about that, which is being dominated mostly by women and men in touch with themselves, but mostly by women. So we may as well just keep driving it forward. Amina, can you tell us about your work, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, I'm Amina Peterson, aka Goddess Amina. I'm the director and founder of the Atlanta Institute of Tantra and Divine Sexuality. And I actually started in this work as a sex surrogate in the 90s. And so I was working as a sex surrogate in Chicago, and that kind of opened my mind to a different reality of sex from that moment forward. So I was 19, didn't know much about anything else except that, that I could make a lot more money. And so that's really what that kind of pulled me in. I saw an ad in the Chicago Reader. And, but from that, I just, I was in college, I was in the military at the time, and I just kind of nerded out and had continued nerding out. Ended up going to massage school in the early 2000s, and was introduced to bestselling and different things, tantra and stuff like that. So I started nerding out in a different way. And that changed the scope of my work. So in between the 90s and the early 2000s, my work was very activism oriented, and which is very draining in the body. And I had my sex work on the side that just kind of rolled over from the sex surrogacy. When I started actually studying and working with therapists, both personally and within my work, it really changed the dynamic of things. So there was a big break for me between the first therapist that I worked with as a sex surrogate and moving into somatic body work and inviting that, touch, working with sex therapists that do the clinical side and can't offer touch. And like Jaiya said, like, a lot of what I do and teach really, the sex is what really gets people to like perk up and pay attention. But that's because that's what we're kind of programmed to. We know that we want to have sex. There's so many of us are not having it in a way that feels really good to us. And we don't really know why oftentimes. And you can't really tell anybody because you just had sex. And so there's like this thing that we do where we protect this misinformation, like, horrible lovers are thriving through our secrecy. And so in my work, I invite people to kind of both work on conscious erotic communication and also working on actually being in their body so that they can know what their needs are to communicate. And it's, and sometimes I'm a breakup coach because sometimes it's just a mismatch. So my work kind of spans over the field. I get people in with the class on blowjobs, right? We have mindful masturbation class. It sells out. Everybody wants to come. But then we spend a lot of time in breath and in body. And then people leave like, oh, that's different than what I thought. I thought I was going to devote myself to pleasing someone else instead of to learning what I need to find pleasure. So that's where my work is rooted in. And it's fun. It's fun times.
And can you explain what sex surrogacy or a sex surrogate is exactly?
Yeah, so kind of like a mom, birthing surrogate, where you get someone to give birth when in place of you, and it's the same thing, only someone's having sex in place of a lover. So I was working with a psychiatrist, and where he would work with clients to get most at the time. This was at the first Gulf War, so a lot of the clients were veterans that had PTSD and were sometimes afraid to return to touch with their partners, or the most of my clients at that time were like that. But it could be a host of things, like people who don't typically have access to sexual pleasure would need a surrogate, someone that can come in as a professional, offer sexual touch, offer intimacy in a container that is safe and that does not, and that there are specific boundaries. Money is a very specific boundary in sex, and I love that's available for folks. And so a sex surrogate just works in place of the lover and offers sexual intimacy to those that are in need.
There's a great movie called The Sessions with Helen Hunt that really portrays this, and it's based on a true story. So I highly recommend that if you're curious about finding out more about that.
All movies are based on true stories. Jaiya, let's start. This came up with I think all of your couples that you all worked with, but something that resonated for me was the idea that women hold on, right? We hold our breath and we hold on when we're experiencing pleasure or clitoral stimulation, or we're having sex. We have trouble releasing. And as soon as I heard, I think it was Damon and Erica talking about that. Yeah. And when she was lying on the table, they both had very profound moments when they were able to kind of release their bodies and just accept the pleasure and just relax into it. And they both got emotional. And I think for me, I realize so many times when I'm having sex or when I'm experiencing pleasure, I do the very same thing. Instead of relaxing into the movement of what's happening, you're holding on or you're clenching. So can you, Jaiya, talk to us about that a little bit? Because I think that's pretty common.
Yeah. What I see happens over time is people brace, especially the energetic blueprint, because there's a need for space, there's a need for less, there's a need for slow down. And what happens is their body feels like it's always being bombarded. So this tension starts to come in, and it freezes in the body, and the body starts to freeze even more or dissociate, where a person will fly out. And these are trauma responses. We go into freeze, we go into flight, we go into flee. And what I see in a lot of bodies is this frozen. And I think a lot of it comes from what's looping in our heads. Sometimes when we're caught in our head, we're afraid our body doesn't look well or smell well or something like that. So it's not always some deep, intense trauma, but it's this like thinking, and then I'm not breathing. And so we brace. And then if we can let the body start to unleash some of that, or release some of that, or let go of some of that bracing that's happened, oftentimes there's emotion that comes with it or memories of certain things. And in the show, you can see me working with her to go to the event where she braced and then feel herself in the room right then and now. We actually did that for a little while, of going back and forth from the moment she braced and really feeling that in her body to being here and now. Because what that is the body doesn't know it's here and now. The body still thinks it's in the past experience, intense experience or traumatic experience that happened, and it hasn't learned that it's safe in the space. And so what you're seeing there is her learning that she's safe again and she can let go because she's here and now, not stuck in that past event.
Yeah. And Amina, that happened with Joey too, a little bit, right? I mean, her experiencing the pleasure of her own body and being present for that, right? Was part of her work with you?
Yeah, I mean, we did the same thing where, we saw the same thing where there's almost a stiffening up. And when we have body issues, we really do that. Like, I think in our mind somewhere, it tells us that if we stiffen up a little bit, we won't look the way that we look to ourselves, or we won't look the way that we think that they think that we look. And so we kind of freeze, we stiffen up. I always when I'm teaching, I'm always talking about like how we try to hold in a fart. Like, it's not going to seep out and you're not going to smell it. You're holding in, you're squeezing back against yourself, and it's not real. And so it's really important. Like, that was the thing. It's like, well, let's take a break and let's just kind of look at ourselves so that you can see what's being witnessed when you're in a sexual space, when you're trying to be intimate and you're trying to open up and have this moment, but you don't know what you look like. You haven't really looked at yourself. And so you're only thinking about all the criticisms that you have against yourself. And then that just makes you kind of seize up. It makes you try to make yourself smaller. And you essentially become smaller in that moment. And so, yeah, with Joy, it was just good to kind of help her expand into herself and just witness the fullness that, and to just start to understand that instead of hiding and shrinking away from it.
Yeah, because I think we all, you can be guarded and you can be self-conscious, right? There's there's all these ways it kind of shows up or manifests in our sexual relationships. There's the times where you want to be smaller, you want to shrink, or you don't want to be as vulnerable and you want to be guarded, or you want to be in control of the situation. That happened, Michaela, with your two, with the couple, the German woman. What was her name again?
Felicitas
and
Rama.
Yeah, Rama. Because she was like, that's like me, very guarded and very in control. And watching them do that work where they had their eyes closed and that movement that they were doing was really, really beautiful to see. And kind of you can't be in that with your guard up. So it's a great way to shed all of that.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing, Jaiya and Amina both talked about that, right, is that in the body, we don't make any difference between a real threat, in the moment threat and a perceived threat. It's like we have these responses in the nervous system. And then, of course, when you have a couple that's been together for a while, there's layers and layers and layers of that bracing and holding and moving against, and then a little bit of resentment comes on top of that. And then something went wrong and it builds another layer. And so it's this deep earth of memories in the body, so that even when people are incredibly willing to actually connect, right? These two wanted to sexually connect, but they just couldn't get there. There was so much in between the two of them. And, when you look at, and when we talk about trauma right now, we're not talking extreme things, as Jaiya was saying. It could be just you don't feel good in your body at the moment. We're talking any form of injury is how I sometimes explain it, right? So you could have a surgery, you could have a stubbed knee, you could have been hurt emotionally, you could have been hurt sexually, however, spiritually even, right? You can have all kinds of injury that keeps you from being in that present moment. And what I did with them specifically is I had them use movement to break up the kind of freeze in the body. There is a way that when you move the body in ways that are not linear at all, it accesses the body's kind of self-cleaning and unshaking, undoing mechanism where you can become present again. And so I did a lot of that with them, and why we take often the sense gate away, right? With Jaiya had it with the gorgeous blindfold, by the way, right? And things like that, is because the sense gate is how we focus, right? Our eyes, when our eyes get very focused, our bodies get into that full-on forward motion. While, for instance, if our eyes get kind of relaxed, you can try this right now. If you relax your eyes and you can actually see your body peripherally and the room, your entire nervous system relaxes. That's the way we're built from a nervous system perspective, right? And then if you focus in, your body gets kind of somewhat tighter and you go kind of forward. So when we take the sense gate of sight away, then all the other become much more alive, and we're getting out of the habitual way of being with our partner, and it can break up all, old trauma, old freeze, old brace. And so within a very short period of time, we were able to kind of break down that old stuff between the two of them and get them present. And it was very, very touching seeing it in person when she did relax and when he gained a bit of confidence that he could.
Because it's also, the trauma is one thing. And of course, we've all had our trauma, and there is intergenerational trauma, but it's also about we create habits, right? We create sexual habits and patterns of behavior. And I think a lot of the show is about breaking those patterns. Would you say that's an accurate assessment, Michaela?
I would definitely say that that's true. And even the habits, so we have habits within ourselves, and often, right, our first experiences of relationship and sex and intimacy are with ourselves. But we have those typically at an age where that's not okay, right? And alone in our room. So often you'll see in people when you work with them that they have this kind of secrecy, fast, even like body patterns that have to do with having engaged intimately or pleasurably or sexually, or in, fantasies about somebody taking you away, whatever people have going on in their intimate fantasy life. That is already in the body, right? That's already there before you get to a first partner. And then the habits with every partner and with every time you reinforce these things just get stronger and stronger. And then you can see the shape of someone's habit pattern. Then you get with another person. And I always say in my workshops that in a relationship, there's always three, right? It's you, it's the other person, it's the relationship. And the relationship builds an entity all by itself, where that particular relationship has both people's imprints playing together, both people's attachment style playing together, both people have certain trauma patterns that work perfectly together. So that relationship starts running. It's the tail wagging the dog at some point, essentially.
Yeah. And it's nice. It's just so empowering as a woman to be able to break those patterns. I know for myself personally, I never felt comfortable showing a man where to put his hand or showing a man how to stimulate me until I was in my 40s. I faked so many orgasms, and this is from somebody who has a very strong personality. I didn't want to emasculate them any more than they were already emasculated by my personality. So I was always less pushy in bed because I'm pushy as a person. And that led to so many bad habits of mine and not experiencing pleasure and real intimacy with somebody, until I had the vocabulary and the confidence to know that that was okay to say. It's okay to show somebody how to pleasure you. Somebody who's meant to be with you is going to receive that in a good way, as long as it's brought to the table in a good way. And we all have a right to experience the best kind of orgasm and what works for us. And that was also something that I learned during this show, is how big our clitorises are. I had no idea how vast they were. It's like a tarantula. Amina, I want to talk to you. You did something so powerful in one of the episodes, which was with Joey. You stood there naked, examining your beautiful body and showing the strength of yourself and the strength of what your body's been able to do, and how and create, and to love all your imperfections, and to show her, somebody who has struggled with her weight up and down fluctuating, which is something that I think we can all relate to. But you did an exercise where you both stood in front of the mirror and talked about that. And I want to ask you, how does that impact the way we look at ourselves, and how necessary and frequent is that exercise to do as a woman?
The mirror work and just mirrors in general, it's so important in this, because we don't look at ourselves. We've somehow managed to only look at ourselves through the lens of getting ready to see other people. So the way that we're looking at ourselves is, how do we conform? How do we make ourselves presentable? It's never, how do I adore myself? It's never, how do I see myself? And so we like I said earlier, we shy ourselves down, we make ourselves small because of it. And orgasms need a lot of room to be present, and for us to desire that sensation that we experience. And as we move into orgasmic energy, as we experience pleasure, we need to have the space to expand. And when we don't see ourselves, we collapse. We just collapse in. And so, for as far as frequency, I'd go with, I coach my clients to masturbate every day, to look at themselves daily, like to make it a daily practice. And you don't have to go into a ritual of mirror work every day, but just to really examine yourself daily, to see how you see yourself, as opposed to how you desire others to how you desire to be seen by others. And it really starts to change your availability to be present in relationships. What you just said, Chelsea, when you talked about like the person, that is meant to be there will be there. You start to know that when you see yourself, like the people that are supposed to be around you are there because you're you, not because you're changing parts of yourself so that they can accept you. Because when you do that, you'll never really truly access your pleasure potential. You just kind of shut yourself off little by little, and without even realizing it, move into this kind of people pleasing, almost what's almost nature or second nature for women in today's society. Is just to kind of default into making sure that you're cared for, making sure that my moans are loud enough so you know that you're making me happy, making sure that my makeup is on enough so that you desire me, instead of just acknowledging that my existence is desire. I am desirable because I am here, and those that want to be around me will be there. So that ritual, like moving into that work on a daily basis, but really setting aside time, like sitting in front of a mirror, lighting your candles, looking at yourself, massaging your skin, noticing where how we're evolving as humans, because there's a complete evolution that is going on, whether we're looking at it or not. And so that we're not surprised by ourselves or afraid of ourselves in sex.
Yeah, and I would argue, and obviously I think we're all on the same page here, the more you get to know yourself and the more you come into acceptance and love and gratitude for the bodies that we're given, the more you attract the people that are going to love you for that reason too. It starts within. And when we do that work, it's a domino effect. And we just bring in all of that goodness right back to us. It's just a big reflection.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Jaiya, you did something that I've never seen ever, which is basically you and your partner touching each other without touching each other, touching each other's energy fields. And I just was blown away by that. I just couldn't believe that you could become so aroused by having your partner just do work around your body. So how did you tell me about that? Tell us all about that more, and how you came to find that out. I mean, we all know we have energy, but since it's not measurable, some people, don't take energy as seriously as others.
Mm-hmm. Well, can I just say how much badasses we are, all of us here. Like, I'm listening to every one of you and just like, oh my gosh, yes, yes, yes. Like, what we've done with this show, I was thinking about it yesterday, is like such badassery. And so like that moment for me of demonstrating that on camera with my partner was like this moment of like, oh my gosh, like not just the 20 years or decades of doing this work, but also putting it on camera, some of us for the first time ever, and showing things like that. And when we show things like that, it then becomes a possibility in the culture. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to show it, was because here's what's possible. Not because anybody's broken if they're not having it, not because there's anything wrong with you if you don't feel energy yet. And I say yet because we all have the capability to do it. And one way is just a very simple, if everybody rubs their hands together and you can press and start to create friction between your hands. And then when you pull your hands apart, there's like a tingle, or you can feel even like a heat between, like a magnetism between your two hands. And that's just a simple way to start, to feel it, you know? And my partner was super skeptical. What you're seeing there, he was like, when he first met me, he was like, Jaiya, what is going on? Like, why are you shaking? He's like, maybe you're faking it. Maybe it's BS. Like, he just didn't know what was up with that. So what you're seeing on screen, he learned to do. It wasn't something that just he knew and was able to do. He just kept saying yes to it, even though it was super weird for him. So he was skeptical. He thought it was weird. He thought it was woo-woo BS in the beginning. And then eventually he learned my blueprint. He learned how to give me space. And so I think the easiest way to describe it is, if you've ever went to kiss somebody and you feel all this energy right before you're about to kiss. It's like in the anticipation and in the, oh, it's about to happen. It's this on the edge of your seat kind of energy. And then the kiss happens and the energy gets collapsed. There's a different feeling in the body from that. And so it's in the anticipation of the touch that I can then get so sensitive that I can feel touch without touch. And there are energy fields here that are measurable, that are off the body, that we can feel.
How do we measure them?
They've measured them with different, like, when you look at quantum physics and some of the tools that they use there.
Oh, that's why I don't know about it.
Yeah, I get into quantum physics geekery because that's where a lot of this stuff starts to, some of the stuff we're talking about starts to be shown.
Yeah, because so for those of you who haven't watched the series yet, Sex, Love, and Goop, there's a beautiful scene where her partner, Jaiya's partner, is bringing her to orgasm, correct, Jaiya?
Yep.
Yeah, without any touching on the body. He is working around her body and working over her energy field. And he is bringing her, I mean, you've obviously done this with him before. It looked like you had done that before. But for people who haven't seen it, it's a beautiful thing to try with your partner.
And what amazed me when I was watching it, it always amazes me because I'm blindfolded, right? I don't know what he's doing. And I do that on purpose because I don't want people to think like, oh, she can see him, so she knows what's going on. But like that moment he's at my head and I'm like, are you at my head? Because and it still shocks me that I can feel where he's at, even though we've done it many, many times in our lovemaking.
I think I may have orgasmed during that scene also. So
I've had a lot of people write to me saying that it affected them. Like as they were watching it, they were having a response to it.
I was saying that yesterday to somebody actually, because that is so true when what Jaiya is saying, right? Is like, we can learn through resonance. We can actually learn through resonance. And that's what's also, when you say, the show and the badassery in the show, I think that was one of the things that I found so compelling, was that actually people can look at pleasure, right? They can look at different touch. They can look at relaxation in the body, and they start resonating. And it opens their body, and they don't even know what they're doing, and it just happens. And that's really, really cool, because it means that people can get access to something that they never even knew existed in their own body while watching.
Yeah, well, Erica says that in the show about, if you can achieve an even higher state of consciousness with your partner, with somebody you already love, right? You're bringing yourself and your relationship to another level. So it's just it's empowering for couples, and just so empowering for women to understand themselves in that way, and to create a stronger relationship with your sexual being. And Michaela, what is the most, I know you work with a lot of celebrity couples and you do a lot of work. I know you work with Gwyneth and you've worked with Jada Pinkett Smith. What is the most common, I mean, even among any couple, what is the most common kind of hurdle that you deal with?
Well, there's typically three areas that, I mean, there's, every relationship has its own, challenges, and it's different, of course, because it's different people, but there's themes. And one of the themes, of course, is the theme of what we, for instance, saw with Felicitas and Vama, right? The spark being gone. That moment when you have a depth of relationship that actually makes the relationship aspect pretty good, but suddenly you no longer have that chemistry. And that's usually a very, very scary moment in a relationship because it's a make or break moment. Some people just resign themselves quietly to that because it wasn't that important, they say, in the first place, right? And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's just how you deal with the pain of that part being gone, right? Or resentment comes in, or people start, with infidelities or other forms of coping, and it erodes the relationship aspect that's actually quite good because that chemistry aspect is gone. And then, so within that, there's, of course, an enormous amount of exploration as to what's really optimal between two people in that domain, and how do you recreate the spark while keeping the depth of relationship. And so that's one big hurdle that often happens. The other thing that I think is not often talked about, that's very, very important, is the why of the relationship. Meaning, why are you with that person and what's the purpose of that relationship? Because often in the beginning, when we meet someone, we don't talk about these things because it's considered pushy, or you don't want to scare the person off, or you don't know, right? And then you just get into the relationship and you don't actually discover that you're basically incompatible in your why till way later on. So classic example that's easy to understand is somebody wants children, somebody doesn't. But that's pretty clear cut. But there's many others, like, for instance, somebody wants a lot of sexual adventure and in general an adventurous life, and the other person also does that, but then wants to settle down, let's say, or have children or start a business, and suddenly it's never been negotiated. Why are people actually doing what they're doing together? So that's a big one that I have to work with.
And that's
a
something
lot.
That's something also that Jaiya touches on. I mean, in a sense, the erotic blueprint, because everybody has a different erotic blueprint. So Jaiya, can you talk to us a little bit about that and what the 5 blueprints are?
Sure. The 5 blueprints are energetic, and this is someone who loves anticipation, space, tease, longing. The sensual, this is someone who's ignited by all of their senses. So taste, smell, delicious food in your mouth while you're just being scintillated and touched and all the yummy stuff. And then the next one is the sexual, and the sexual is someone who's turned on by what we think of as sex in our culture. Penetration, orgasm, nudity. And then we have the kinky, and kinkies are turned on by what's taboo. And that's what's taboo for them. So that could look like sex out of missionary position, or that could look like what we think of when we think of BDSM. And then the last one is the shapeshifter. And the shapeshifter is someone who's turned on by all of it. They want all of it all the time, and they want more of it. They can go forever and ever and ever. They have huge capacity, huge uptake for pleasure. And we use the 5 blueprints as a language to know ourselves. And I think that's part of what we've been talking about here, is who are we as erotic beings, and becoming more self-actualized and realized is, well, who am I and how do I know myself? So learning about the blueprints, taking the erotic blueprint quiz, these are ways that we can, all the body games in the show, these are ways in which we start to know ourselves better. And then we can own ourselves, we can own our pleasure and start to, you were talking, Chelsea, about asking for what you wanted and where to put your hand. Once we know, then we can start to really own who we are as erotic beings. And Amina, what you were pointing to, just so beautiful, this piece of not twisting ourselves in pretzels anymore. And because now I know myself, then I can own, here's who I am, and, you know, take it or leave it, you know, kind of a way of being of, I love myself enough that I'm going to be me. And then the final one is to live your pleasure, live as this, and that then it's when it gets integrated into your life.
And is it possible for one to be one or more blueprint?
Yeah. So if you go to the blueprint quiz, it'll tell you what percentages if you take the in-depth quiz. So a lot of people are a percentage of each of them. So for example, I'm primarily sexual. I was like 33% sexual, and then close underneath that is energetic. And then right underneath my energetic was, I believe, sensual. Kinky was my lowest on my own quiz. I was 0% kinky. So I didn't have any kinky. Guess what my partner's highest is? Kinky. And he's 0 sexual, and my highest is sexual. So there you can see the mismatch in our eroticism. When we look at the different percentages, we really get a clear view, a bigger picture of it.
And if you are mismatched in that way, it's not it's not the end of the road.
You're not doomed. No, not at all. It's just learnable skills. Michaela says it. I think it's in the first episode of like, it's just skill. It's not necessarily that we're incompatible. It's just that we needed to learn.
And it's communication, right? It's understanding what your partner is interested in, and it's understanding where their pleasure zones are and what turns them on, and understanding that about each other, which is all as simple as an open dialogue.
Yeah. Well, I also want to add to what Jaiya is saying there, because it is so important when we know those lenses, right? We know what our partners want. We can actually offer that without there being any suffering around ours not being given or gotten, because one of the long-term indicators of good relationship is generosity. And so when we go past, just the sexual aspect, what makes a relationship work in the long run is the willingness to give to one's partner, not as a martyr and not just as a barter for some love, but from a place of fullness and from a place of generosity. And particularly when we look at something like the blueprints, right? And it's so good because it's so clear. You can say on occasion, I'm just going to give this to my partner, because that's where they live and that's enjoyable for them. And then it's not so, fraught with all this horrible, I'm not being seen, I'm not being heard, I'm not getting mine, because it becomes a much more open and understandable situation, which is always good.
And more playful, right?
And more playful.
That's
Exactly.
what we all want to achieve. And you said it so brilliantly, Amina, that, sex is like the way adults play. And that's a great way for us all to think about it, because that is how we act. That's when we get down and we can be silly and we can be vulnerable and we can, have fun with our partners. So talk a little bit about that, please.
I think we just take sex way too seriously. That's the biggest issue, right? It's like there's the taboo that's held around sex kind of places it in this space where it's just this real serious realm, and no one has, we want to be able to play in the space. I want to be able to be free. And this, especially as a Black woman, is probably one of the few places that I can, with enough allowance, really just fully be myself and not have any of the fears that show up for me day to day in society. Yet here I am, and it's sheltered and it's protected. And people hear the term sacred sex, and then they put it up on a higher shelf. And I'm like, no, it's sacred because you're sacred, because we're sacred beings, and we get to have fun and be free and playful. And, as Michaela was talking about, like the body just moving and opening up, like this is that space that we get to have movement and dance without having to be on beat, and all of those things that we're like so rigid about. I loved watching the dance, and it was just, what was funny is I was at a retreat last week. So I was hosting a retreat where we got to watch everything, but we had already moved through, and I hadn't seen any. I didn't know what was going to happen. So everyone had already danced together with their blindfolds, and then they saw it in action. We had a demo with Kundalini activation where people were witnessing what Jaiya went through with her orgasm, and then they saw it, and so it really made it feel real. Like, oh, we really can play like this, and that all of this stuff is this visibility that comes with this, is that people do get this kind of reality check where, you're not laughing and you're not really being in your body. You're kind of posing, and especially for us women, I get that back arch, right? And all this is why I really shy away from a lot of the sex teaching classes on sex that point to like how to really please your partner. Because it's like, if I'm playing with someone who is my partner, aren't they going to be happy that I'm playing? Like, isn't that what we did when we were younger? We were just free and playing. Can we bring that energy back into our bedrooms and love spaces so that we're eager to get back there? A lot of people, our concept of desire and whether or not I have desire, I have a low libido, all of that to me is just basically the idea that we don't want to get there. Because if it's something that you really desire and crave, if you are having so much fun there, you can't wait to get back. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is create a mindset that I want to get back to that romp that we had last night or last week. I want to go back to that place where we were playful in bed and having fun. And that is, I think that's where a lot of our magic is in sex.
Yeah, and I think what you said about masturbating every day is so true. I mean, I spent so many years finding masturbating like shameful and embarrassing, almost depressing. Like, what's the point unless you have unless you're with someone? It's like, I don't want to climax and be sitting there by myself. Like, that sounded depressing. But now that I've become a little bit more empowered in my sexuality, and I have a partner that I'm in love with, that I'm turned on by all the time, I masturbate all the time when I'm not around him. I have such a much more healthy relationship with my own sexuality now. So it just kind of begets more and more positive sexuality when we are in touch with ourselves, and when we do spend that time with ourselves. It is good to masturbate every day. Why wouldn't we? Men are
It's your own vitamin.
Men are doing it 50 times a day. We need to take over. Yeah, exactly. It is our own vitamin. Okay, well, I think we're out of time. So let's leave everybody. Let me ask a question to each of you to leave everybody. What is the one takeaway you want our listeners to have regarding ways to have better sex and better intimacy? Why don't you start, Michaela?
The one sentence answer to better sex and better intimacy is, we've talked about it so much, and I really love being, on with everyone, because it is the get into your body, bring the body back to the heady stuff, to the, to just combine it. You don't have to leave the body behind. Just bring the body back, play, move, touch, engage, as a means to kind of really connect. So if it would have to be one sentence, then that's that. Bring your body back.
Jaiya?
We are already orgasmic, ecstatic beings. Just own who you are and love who you are. And I know it sounds cliche, this unconditional love for you, from you, but when I got that, every single being around me gets it. And so the more that you love yourself and understand that you are already an orgasmic being, the better it gets.
And mine is just be willing to learn and to shift our way of thinking. Everything that we know, that we thought we know about sex, has room for expansion. And so be willing to open up into expansion, be willing to try new things and to see what that feels like for you and discover what your pleasure is. Be willing.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I would encourage everyone also, as a woman, to just look at yourself in the mirror every morning, like Amina so beautifully showed us, and just remind yourself that you're here and you're strong and you're powerful and that you're beautiful. And this is the body that you were given. So embrace it. Don't resist it. Embrace your beauty. And yeah, and then we can all just be having better sex lives. What's wrong with that, huh? And then we can create world peace, you guys.
Yay!
Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much. It was so nice to talk to all of you, and congratulations. And for everyone watching, make sure you go watch Sex, Love, and Goop right away. It's on Netflix.
Thank you.
Thank you.